Today we are going to look at the percent equation. A percent equation is an equivalent form of a percent proportion in which the percent is written as a decimal. So our equation is part equals percent times the whole. Now the important thing to remember is that the percent is going to be written as a decimal. So when you look at the percent proportion, we have part over the whole equals percent over 100. And if we were to divide the percent by 100, that would give us a decimal. So that would look like part over whole equals the percent. And that would be decimal form. And then if we were to solve this equation, we could multiply both sides times the whole, and that would cancel out, and we would get part equals percent as a decimal times the whole. That's just the way that this is derived. The percent equation is the same thing as the percent proportion. It's just derived differently. So let's look at the percent equation and finding the part. So we have find 6% of 525. We could also write the percent equation is equals percent times of for these types of problems where it's not necessarily clear about which is the part and which is the whole. So is, remember, is our part, of is our whole. So the percent equation is part equals percent times the whole. And the part, we don't know because we're finding the percent of 525. So I'm going to represent this as P for part. Our percent is 6%. And remember that we convert a percent to a decimal by moving the decimal 2 times to the left. So that is 0.06 or 600ths. And then our whole is 525. So now I have a simple equation here. Part equals 600ths times 525. And when you multiply 525 times 600ths, we get 31 and a half. So 6% of 525 is 31 and a half. Okay, so let's try another example like this. Here we have our equation, part equals percent times the whole. What number is 35%, there's our percent, of 88? We don't know the part. Our percent is 35%, but remember we have to write it as a decimal. So 35 hundredths times 88. So 88 times 35 hundredths is 30.8. So 35% of 88 is 30 and 8/10. Okay, let's look at our next example. Here we have a real world problem. 25% of the students at East Ridge High School prefer soccer over lacrosse. If there are 800 students at East Ridge, how many students prefer soccer? So let's write our equation. Part equals percent times whole. We know our percent is 25%, and we know there are a total of 800 students at East Ridge, and we want to know who prefers soccer. So that's our part. So part equals, our percent is 25, so we've got to write that as a decimal, which is 25 hundredths, times 800. And 25 hundredths times 800, you could also say a fourth of 800, so we could look at it as 1/4 of 800. That's like dividing by 4. That would be 200 students that prefer soccer. And feel free, when you know the fraction equivalent, sometimes it is easier to multiply by a fraction. Okay, now we want to find the percent. So we're looking at 20 is what percent of 600? So we know 20 is, that's our part, of 600, that's our whole. So this is our part, this is the whole, and we do not know the percent. So part equals percent times the whole. Our part is 20. We do not know the percent, so I'm going to put a P here. And we know that the whole is 600. So here we have 20 is equal to P times 600. So now I have to divide both sides by 600 because I have a division equation. I'm actually going to make this an easier problem by canceling out my zeros. I can look at this as a fraction, and 2/60ths can still be reduced to 1/30 equals P. Now, this is not a percent. I can make it a percent though. And remember, we've got to go back to our fraction, decimal, percent conversions. I can convert 1/30 by dividing 1 by 30. And if I do that, 30 does not go into 10, so I put a 0. And 30 goes into 100 3 times. That would give me 90. And here I'm going to have a repeating decimal. So I'm going to have 0.03 repeating. So I have a decimal, but I have to convert that to a percent because I'm looking for the percent. So don't forget to convert the decimal to a percent. So I move the decimal 2 times to the right, and I get 3.3%. And you could even put the repeating sign if you wanted. So remember, with the percent equation, I'm converting between the percent and the decimal. I have to convert the percent to a decimal when I'm operating with it, and then whenever I'm trying to find the percent, I'm converting the decimal back to a percent. So let's try number, actually I want you to try number 1 on your own. Go ahead and pause it and try it on your own, and then we'll check it. So you should have had a chance to try this problem. We have 80 is what percent of 250. So our equation looks like 80 equals the percent times 250. Divide both sides by 250. And 80 divided by 250 is 32 hundredths. Remember, this is my percent, but it's written as a decimal. So I have to convert it by moving the decimal 2 times to the right, and I get 32%. Okay, number 2, Jackson made 12 of his 20 free throws at practice. What percent of the throws did he make? So my equation is part equals percent times the whole. He made 12 of his 20, so 12 is our part because 20 is the total amount of free throws that he tried. He only made 12. That is our part. We do not know the percent, but we do know the whole, which is 20. Now, I know that I use the same variable here just because we don't really use a percent sign as a variable. I like to just put the percent sign so we can distinguish it from the P. But ultimately, you need to remember that we're finding the percent here. So I divide by 20, and 12/20ths, if I divide 12 by 20, I could do that, but I could also look at 12/20ths as a percent, and I could multiply that times 5, and 12 times 5 is 60 100ths, which is 60%. Remember, you have a lot of tools by now. You know how to convert fraction decimals and percents, and you can use these tools. 12/20ths has to be converted to a percent. You could divide 12 by 20 and get 0.6 and then convert it. But you could also see that 12/20ths, if I multiply that times 5 over 5, I would get 60 hundredths, which is the same as 60%. Use the tools that you've been given to solve these problems the easiest way. Find the whole. So 65 is 52% of what number? Our percent equation is part equals percent times the whole. 65 is, that's our part, 52% is our percent, and I'll write that as a decimal, of what number? We don't know the whole. So I'm going to divide both sides by 52 hundredths. Now remember, when we divide by a decimal, if you want to show your work over here, when I divide, it's going to look like that, and I have to move that decimal 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm really dividing 52 into 6,500. 52 goes into 65 one time. Bring down the 0. 52 goes into 130 two times. And 52 goes into 260 5 times. And that is 125. So 65 is 52% of what number? And that makes sense because 65 is a little more than half of 125. I'd like for you to try letter A on your own. We will check that in class. Let's do a real world problem. 60% of the students in Mrs. Adams' class completed their homework on time. If 15 students completed their homework on time, how many students are in Miss Adams' class? So we've got part equals percent times the whole. So we know our percent, 60%, and we write 60% as 6/10. 60% completed their homework. 15 is that number that completed their homework. But we don't know the total amount. So our part is 15. Our percent is 0.6, and we're looking for the whole, the total number of students in that class. I'm going to divide both sides by 6/10, and 15 divided by 6/10 is 25. So there are 25 students in Mrs. Adams' class. Remember to write down any questions that you may have about this lesson, and we will go over these in more depth tomorrow.